At least Nathan makes us proud, my father said, raising his glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stood there, frozen in front of 200 guests, while he erased me with one sentence. My name is Eugenie. And that night, I learned something brutal. You don't have to scream to be humiliated. Sometimes silence cuts deeper than shame. The ballroom shimmered with money. Crystal chandeliers blinked above gold-trimmed linens, and every guest sparkled in tuxedos or gowns made to impress rather than move. A jazz quartet hummed somewhere behind the crowd, but all sound faded when my father lifted his glass. He didn't look at me when he said it. She didn't take after the family business, he said with a smirk, his voice carrying effortlessly across the marble floor. But at least she looks sharp in a uniform. The room chuckled. Not everyone, but enough to feel like thunder in my chest. I kept my posture. I didn't blink. I let the smile rest on my face like armor, while inside, something buckled, something that had learned long ago not to cry in public, especially not here, especially not in front of him. He turned back to my brother, Nathan, clapping him on the shoulder like a prize bull. Applause followed, scattered but eager, and Nathan dipped his head in mock humility. He was used to this, groomed for this. The heir to everything, the company, the name, the legacy. I, on the other hand, had returned only as a guest, or maybe as a symbol, a prop, something to fill the empty chair next to my mother, who said nothing and smiled too hard. Waiters glided past with champagne. A few guests gave me polite nods. One even winked, like it was all a joke I'd understand later. But it wasn't a joke. It was a message. I didn't belong here, not as a daughter, not as a veteran, not as anything. My father had said it with a smile, but the meaning was scalpel sharp, and I couldn't stop thinking about how many years I'd tried not to care. But it only took one sentence, one glass raised too high, to undo everything I thought I had made peace with. There was a hallway in our house lined with family portraits, oil paintings in gold leaf frames, each face stern, proud, and painfully male. Davenport men, going back generations, stared down at you as you passed, like silent judges weighing your worth. My brother Nathan's spot had been reserved since he was 12. Mine was never mentioned. Growing up in that house was like living inside a glass case, polished from the outside, suffocating on the inside. Expectations weren't spoken. They were assumed, inherited, and enforced by glances across dinner tables and checkbooks slid silently into pockets. Nathan took to it naturally. He walked like our father, talked like him, knew when to agree, when to smile, when to charm the boardroom. He was the chosen one before he even understood what that meant. My place, if I had one, was to support the image, not question it. But I did question it. Quietly, at first. Then louder. When I applied to the academy, I didn't leave to rebel. I left because staying meant dying by degrees, invisible, obedient, and resentful. I chose the military because it didn't care about last names or legacy. It cared about grit, clarity, and action. Things I could measure, things I could earn. I still remember the day I told my father. His face didn't move, not a twitch, just a long sip of bourbon and one sentence. Don't expect that to impress anyone here. He meant the family, the board, the bloodline. He never forgave me for stepping out of the frame he built, and in truth, I never asked him to. I needed air. The ballroom was too full, of cologne, of laughter, of people clinking glasses like they'd never questioned their place in the world. I slipped through a side corridor and found myself near the service hallway. That's when I heard them. "She doesn't have to understand," Nathan said. His voice relaxed, almost bored. "Just get her to show up in uniform next to the company logo. That's all anyone sees." My father chuckled, low and dry. "A hero sells well these days, especially one we can control." I didn't move, didn't breathe. The words slid down my spine like ice water. They weren't discussing me. They were packaging me. And suddenly, The uniform I once chose as escape felt like a marketing prop in someone else's script. I backed away before they saw me, pulse high, mouth dry. The music from the ballroom spilled into the hallway again. I followed it, back into the lights, the chatter, the illusion. That's when I saw him. Across the room, half-shadowed near the far column, stood a man in dress-white uniform, polished, still, eyes locked on me. I knew that face. I'd seen it in desert heat, under blackout tents, in briefing rooms where lives were wagered on judgment calls. Admiral Maxwell. He hadn't changed, but his presence here, unexpected. And judging by the way he watched me across the room, me in my civilian dress, holding a glass I hadn't sipped, something told me this night wasn't going to unfold the way my father planned. The microphone squealed once before settling into silence. My father stood at the head of the ballroom, hand lightly resting on Nathan's shoulder, like it was a claim of ownership. The spotlight caught his smile, polished, rehearsed, and hollow in a way only I could recognize. He started with the expected: years of sacrifice, legacy, expansion, numbers. Then he turned to Nathan, calling him a man of vision, discipline, and dignity. Everything a Davenport should be. Polite applause followed. Nathan didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Then came the pause. That sharp pivot I knew too well. And of course, my father continued, lifting his glass again, our daughter's here tonight. She may have taken a different path, but hey, at least she knows how to pick a dress that fits. Laughter, scattered but loud enough. One of the board members leaned toward his wife and said something I couldn't hear. She smirked. Another guest added, not everyone's cut out to lead. Some are born to decorate the room. I took a sip of water I didn't need. My fingers gripped the base of the glass too tightly, but I held the smile. If the Navy taught me anything, it was how to remain motionless under fire. Stillness, I had learned, was its own form of power. But inside, something shifted. Not rage, not shame, just a slow, deep cracking, not from the insult, from the realization that it no longer surprised me. I didn't see him move at first. Admiral Maxwell had blended into the back of the ballroom, near the edge of the dance floor, quiet, watchful. But when he stepped forward, everything else seemed to still, no one else noticed yet. The laughter from my father's comment was still fading when I heard it. The sharp, deliberate cadence of dress shoes crossing marble. He stopped directly in front of me. Our eyes met, briefly, firmly, and then, in full view of the entire room, he straightened his spine, brought his hand crisply to his brow, and delivered the salute. Yes, ma'am. The air snapped. Someone dropped a fork. My mother's glass tilted. My father's hand trembled just enough to make his scotch ripple. I didn't return the salute. I didn't move. I only stood there, while every face in that ballroom slowly turned toward us, toward me. Not a single word had been said, but the room had changed. All of them now knew I was not who they thought I was, and neither was he. The silence after the salute didn't last long. Someone coughed, a fork clinked against porcelain, and then the murmurs began. Soft, unsure, stretching across the room like a ripple of disbelief. My father's voice cut through it, sharp, controlled, almost. Don't tell me you brought him here to put on a show. Eugenie. He finally looked at me, but it wasn't a father's gaze. It was the stare of a man whose grip on the room had slipped. The power he wielded so easily, so absolutely, had just cracked, and he didn't know whether to patch it or smash what was left. You think a decorated lapel and a stiff salute changes anything? He added, voice climbing. You think these people will forget who you really are? He didn't say it, but I heard it anyway. Ungrateful, unworthy, unchosen. Nathan stepped forward next, tone slick with half smiles. Let's not get carried away. Admiral or not, I'm sure there's more to this than a military reunion. A few guests chuckled, uneasily. My mother didn't move, and still, I said nothing. I didn't need to. The weight of Admiral Maxwell's presence was already louder than any defense I could give. He hadn't said a word since that salute. He didn't need to either. But my father, always used to having the final word, kept pushing, louder, thinner, more brittle. That's when I realized something that chilled me more than anything he said. He wasn't angry because I embarrassed him. He was afraid because, for the first time in his life, he didn't know what I was capable of. I could feel the shift. The laughter had soured. The whispers carried weight now. Tonal changes. Glances passed across flutes of champagne, like coded messages. One of the board members leaned toward me and said, quietly, "Didn't expect you to drag the Navy into a family dinner." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Nathan tried again, voice dipped in reason. "Look, I'm sure she's done some admirable things, but we all know how titles work in D.C. Favor here, connection there." And then, the clink of glass interrupted him. A tall man near the front of the ballroom set his drink down without a smile. He didn't raise it. He didn't clear his throat. He simply spoke. "I know exactly who she is." All eyes turned. A hush rolled through the room, like a wave pulling back from shore. The man stepped forward. "My name is Senator Cole Harrington. Last year, I reviewed an internal report marked Classified, Level 6. Her name was on the first page." He turned toward my father. "She led the tactical response to a cyber attack targeting the federal power grid. Had she not intervened, half the country would have gone dark in 72 hours. No water, no communication, no heat." His voice was flat, precise, devastating. "She doesn't need you to vouch for her," he finished, "because she already answered to something much bigger." There was no applause, just silence, dense, stunned, and irreversible. My father lowered his glass, and, for the first time that night, he sat down. The silence that followed the senator's words wasn't the awkward kind. It was reverent, like something sacred had just been said, and no one dared contaminate it with noise. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the room, subtle but unmistakable. Eyes no longer glanced past me. They landed, lingered. A few guests nodded. One woman from the board stepped forward, as if to speak, then simply held my gaze with something close to apology. Then my father stood. His chair scraped against the marble, sharp and jarring. He didn't look shaken now. He looked cornered. "You think," he said slowly, voice thick with disdain, "that one report, one military man's salute, one senator's words, erases everything?" He took a step forward, pointing, not at me, but into the space I occupied, like I was an idea he refused to acknowledge. "You abandoned your family when we needed you most. You left your name behind. You walked away." There it was. Not rage, not disappointment, just the old wound speaking through clenched teeth, the one where I refused to become who he needed me to be. I could have matched him, could have reminded him of the years I'd been ignored, the condescension, the weight of his silence at every ceremony I'd earned, but I didn't. I just met his eyes and said, clearly, calmly, "I never needed your approval to serve this country." The words dropped into the air like polished steel. Somewhere behind me, a glass was set gently on a table. A guest exhaled. A fork stopped mid-air. My father stared for a second longer, then looked away. And this time, when he sat down, he didn't rise again. There was no gavel, no press release, no official announcement of who had won and who had lost. But everyone knew. It was in the way the room shifted, subtle, yet irreversible. The center of gravity had moved. It wasn't near the podium where my father stood earlier, or the table where Nathan held court with practiced ease. It was now around me, quiet, measured, undeniable. I wasn't the loudest person in the ballroom. I didn't command attention with flair or charm. But in the aftermath of truth, people began adjusting themselves to it, like a building settling after a tremor. A man from the acquisitions team, someone who had once patted Nathan on the back and barely made eye contact with me. approached. He didn't say much, just extended his hand with a weight I hadn't felt before. "Thank you for your service," he said simply. But the tone was different. It wasn't performative. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. I nodded once and moved on, careful not to linger too long in any one interaction. I wasn't here to bask in anything, but I couldn't ignore it. The nods, the changed expressions, the way conversations leaned toward me now, like people were recalibrating their assumptions. One older woman, a family friend I hadn't seen in over a decade, touched my arm gently and whispered, "They should have let you speak first tonight." Others didn't say a word, but they stood straighter when I passed, eyes softer than before. Some looked away, ashamed, perhaps, of how quickly they'd judged. I let them. I wasn't here for their guilt. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nathan watching me, still smiling, still trying to hold on to his version of the script. But his knuckles were pale where they gripped the stem of his wineglass. For once, no one was circling him. No one asked about next quarter's projections. He looked stranded. I didn't approach him. I didn't gloat. I just let the silence between us say what needed saying. Then Admiral Maxwell returned. His approach was slow, deliberate, not for effect, but out of respect. He extended his hand again, this time without ceremony, but with something even heavier behind it. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it," he said. "And not just for what you did out there, but for how you stood here tonight." I shook his hand, not as his subordinate, not even as a fellow officer, but as someone he saw fully, without filters. His eyes said what few in the room could. "You don't have to prove anything anymore. Not to me, not to them." When he turned and left, I stood there a moment, letting the air settle, and that's when she stepped forward. My mother had always been poised, always polished. She wore silence like an accessory, one she'd used to survive in my father's world. But tonight, she looked older, not tired, just unguarded. She didn't speak. Her hand reached for mine slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd take it. And for a second, I wasn't sure either. But then I felt the tremble in her fingers, just barely. And I understood. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a last-minute apology wrapped in sentiment. It was something raw, wordless, human. She didn't say I'm sorry, but she didn't have to. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I let her hold my hand. I let her feel the weight of everything I had carried in silence. Not for forgiveness, but for acknowledgement. The music had shifted by then. Softer, slower. The chatter more careful now. No more jokes. No more polished declarations. No more pretending. Across the ballroom, I saw my father sitting alone. He wasn't speaking to anyone, not even Nathan. His glass was still half full, untouched. His back was straight, but his shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen. Not in meetings, not in boardrooms, not even at my brother's graduation. It wasn't defeat I saw in him. It was recognition. He had always taught me that dignity couldn't be seen, that it was invisible, fragile, and often useless in the face of power. But tonight, he learned that invisible doesn't mean it isn't real. Power had changed hands, not by force, not by design, but by presence, by truth. And I didn't need to be crowned to know I'd claimed something back, not just their respect, but my place in the room, finally and fully. I left the ballroom as the strings of a violin faded into the distance, swallowed by the hush of polished marble and tired applause. No one followed. No one stopped me. And for once, I didn't look back. By the time I reached DC, the city had already fallen into its late-night hush. The monuments stood still, bathed in amber light, and the Potomac shimmered under the weight of 1,000 reflections. I didn't change out of my dress. I didn't take off my shoes. I just walked, steady and alone, until I reached the edge of the river. There were no cameras, no celebrations, no one waiting. I sat down on a cold stone bench, one I'd known for years, one I used to visit when I felt like I was disappearing. I stared out across the water. where the lights of the city blinked softly against the current. And I remembered, not just the words thrown at me over the years, the questions, the silence, the way my name always seemed to end with an ellipsis when spoken by family. I remembered the look in my father's eyes when he finally saw me and didn't know what to say. I remembered the salute, the weight of it, the clarity. And I smiled, not because it made things right, but because it made things clear. I didn't need redemption. I didn't need applause. I didn't need any of them to tell me I was enough, because for the first time, I wasn't holding my breath. And that, too, is a kind of freedom, 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 is a kind of freedom,